Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming along tonight to our town hall to talk about the safeguard changes that the Greens have secured, what it will mean for many of the campaigns on the ground and what happens next. I'm Adam Bandt. I'm the leader of the Greens, and I'm coming to you here from Ngunnawal and Ngambri country in Canberra, where we've just had a really big, significant win in Parliament on climate. But there's a lot more to do, and we're going to talk about what we've achieved and what happens next. And you're also going to hear from my colleague, the amazing Senator Dorinda Cox, who is our spokesperson for First Nations and also for mining and resources. And she and I are going to be having a chat also with some really special guests that I'm delighted to have here with us tonight, who are fighting on the front lines against some pretty significant attacks on country and attacks on climate with some of the biggest projects around the world, and they're taking on some of the biggest corporations. And we're going to talk to them about their fights and what the achievements that we've been able to secure over the past week here in Parliament will mean for them. As we go through tonight, you may well have some questions, and I want to really encourage you to put your questions in the chat. If you pop your questions in the chat, we will have some time at the end to come back to those questions for myself, for Dorinda, or for any of the campaigners who are here. We'd love to hear from you tonight is about understanding what has just happened and where to next. So please ask away, pop your questions in the chat. Now, as you know, we had an election where we turfed out the Morrison government driving their gas-led recovery, who'd been in complete climate denial for some time. And one of the really clear lessons from the country, where we saw more third voices put into Parliament than ever before, and we saw a record number of people vote for the Greens, was that people wanted action on climate. And the parties that said we are going to back more coal and gas saw their vote go backwards. Labor's vote went backwards. The Coalition's vote went backwards. The party, the Greens, that took on coal and gas and said we can't keep opening up coal and gas mines in the middle of a climate crisis, saw our vote go up. Labor came along and said, oh, well, we've got a policy that, in their words, was going to deal with the climate crisis. They put that on the table. It was called the safeguard mechanism. It's actually something that Tony Abbott first developed. So that was a reheated Tony Abbott policy, of course, with their very weak targets of 43%, Labor's targets, which mean the death of the Great Barrier Reef and mean that we don't meet any of our Paris Agreement commitments. We blow the Paris temperature goals. They came along and they said, we've got a policy called a safeguard mechanism that's going to deal with coal, gas, and other big industrial polluters. And they said, apparently, it was going to drive pollution down. But the problem was it wouldn't. And here's where we started. So where we started was with Labor putting on the table a policy that said this. They said in 2023, the coal and gas corporations and the other polluters covered by the safeguard mechanism are emitting about 140 million tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent into the atmosphere. That's a lot. Under their policy, we have 116 new coal and gas mines in the pipeline. There was no barrier to any of them coming in. Under their policy, pollution from coal and gas and the other corporations was set to go up, right? Not down, because coal and gas are the leading causes of the climate crisis, but coal and gas pollution was set to go up. And on some estimates, it was going to go up by from 140 to as much as 184 million tonnes if all of these coal and gas projects went ahead. And of course, Labor wasn't interested in putting any barrier on them. So when they came and put their mechanism on the table, pollution from coal and gas was going to go up. Why? Because new coal and gas could come in to the pipeline, and all that coal and gas, the existing ones and the new ones, had to do to satisfy their obligations under Labor's safeguard was not actually cut their pollution. They just had to buy some tree planting permits on the other side of the country, and they'd be able to say that their pollution went down, right? It was all an accounting trick. So under the original proposal that we had on the table, coal and gas pollution would keep rising. And this is pretty important because this isn't just a few million tonnes in Australia. Of course, when we export that coal and gas around the world, it gets burned, and that adds to the climate crisis. It doesn't matter where the coal and gas is burned, it'll damage Australia and it'll damage the rest of the world by making the climate crisis worse. So these new coal and gas mines would not only add to Australia's pollution, which is the point on the graph, but they would also blow the global carbon budget. And we know that because the world scientists and the UN Secretary General, who gave us a final warning last week, said countries like Australia, to have any chance of meeting the climate crisis, have to stop opening coal and gas mines. The coalition said, no, we're not interested in anything that even puts a skerrick of obligation on the coal and gas corporation. So that meant they needed the Greens vote to get it through. And we went in and said very clearly, we need to tackle coal and gas and these new coal and gas projects. Coal and gas in Australia can't keep expanding if we're to have any chance of tackling the climate crisis. So we put that on the table. And after months of negotiations and pushing the government with the help of people like you and people in the community, pushing the government to say, don't worry about your targets because your targets will be blown if you keep opening new coal and gas. What we have landed is a big hit on coal and gas. Coal and gas has taken a huge hit under the Greens secured changes. Why is that? Well, because what the Greens have been able to achieve is a hard cap on pollution. That means it will be in law for the first time ever that the areas covered by the safeguard, the coal and gas and other corporations, will have to cut their pollution. It can't go higher than it is now, and it must come down year on year. What does that mean? It means that will stop about half of those 116 new coal and gas projects. And it's not just that they're financially unviable, we will not be allowed to increase our pollution, right? So if you look at that graph, that 140 compared with where it was going to go under Labor and going to go up and up and up, now those projects cannot go ahead because by law, there will be a hard limit on the amount of pollution that will be able to go into the atmosphere from Australia. And that puts those coal and gas projects on ice because about half of those cannot go ahead because they won't be able to fit under this new hard cap. That is what we have secured. And so what that means is we are about half of the way there. The Greens have used our numbers in Parliament to stop about half of those 116 coal and gas projects from going ahead. But we know Labor wants to open the rest of them, and that's where the fight comes in next. And that's where something else that we've secured is very important. We've got now in the law for the first time a pollution trigger. What that means is that every time one of these new coal and gas projects, one of the remaining half of the 116 wants to come into the system, then the government can look at the pollution and look at the project, and if it is going to go above the limit, if it's going to push Australia back above that hard cap, then the government has to take action, right? If it's going to increase climate damage by pushing it above the hard cap, then they will take action. And that action could include putting restrictions on the project or even stopping it from going ahead. And that provides a huge barrier to these coal, oil and gas projects. And we know, and we've seen some really brave young people taking on the government, and there they are over on the left, on the right, taking on the government previously, saying you can't open new coal and gas projects because you owe us a duty of care. Now there's going to be extra legal obligations on the government to look at these big new projects that Labor still wants to enter the system. And if they're going to push up pollution above that hard cap, then they've got to take action, and the action that's available to them includes stopping the project. So there is now going to be a fight over every single project that is going to come into the system. We've also managed to derail the Barossa and Beetaloo gas fields business case. We've managed to secure changes that mean the Beetaloo climate bomb in the Northern Territory which would have unleashed massive amounts of pollution into the atmosphere, is going to face additional costs that some have estimated, depending on what the carbon price is going to be, of about $1 billion a year. Just to give you an idea about how huge these gas fields in the Northern Territory are, if all the Beetaloo project alone could have lifted Australia's pollution by 13% just from this one project, right? That's how big this is if it goes ahead. And if all of the Northern Territory gas fields were opened up, you would be looking at about the equivalent of about 68 years worth of Australia's emissions just from those Northern Territory gas fields alone. So there's countries worth of pollution that is stuck in the ground there, and it needs to stay there. It must stay there. And we've just put a huge roadblock in the way of this Beetaloo project proceeding. Similarly with the Barossa, and you're going to hear from some of the campaigners fighting the Beetaloo, fighting the Barossa in a moment. The Barossa, it's a big gas field off the north of Australia. That now is facing extra burdens as well. They're going to have to be the equivalent of zero CO2. That's going to impose additional costs on them as well. And what you're going to hear is the huge fight that so many people have been taking up against the Barossa project. And there's now another roadblock in the way of that Barossa gas field proceeding. We've also managed to make some other changes to the schemes, and in particular around these offsets, which is this idea that these big gas corporations can just keep buying offsets and just keep polluting. They won't be able to offset their way out of the hard cap, right? So what the hard cap measures is actually how much pollution goes into the atmosphere. It doesn't matter if you've bought a tree planting permit on the other side of the country. You can't get your way out of that hard cap. There's also a bunch of offsets that are in the system at the moment that are totally dodgy. People are getting paid for trees that were growing on their property that would have grown anyway, but apparently it wasn't the rain that did it, and it wasn't nature that grew the trees. They were claiming credit for it themselves, and when the trees grew, they were off getting paid for it, getting credits, and some big polluter on the other side of the country could keep putting pollution into the atmosphere. So those big changes, we've wiped out a bunch of the dodgy offsets, and we've stopped the corporations from being able to get their way above the hard cap by buying offsets. It means there'll be some real rigour in the scheme. And so what will our amendments mean in total? Well, about half of the 116 new projects will be stopped. We're going to cap pollution and bring it down. We've helped derail the huge Beetaloo and Barossa gas projects and made it much harder for new coal and gas to go ahead, reined in a bunch of the dodgy offsets, increased methane monitoring and reporting because methane is so huge. We've stopped coal and gas funding from many sources, so it won't be possible for the government to use a lot of the funds they've been using to now, Scott Morrison was handing out to the Beetaloo, for example. A lot of those funds are going to be stopped, and we've sped up the transition across a number of sectors. And if you don't, you don't necessarily need to take my word for it. It's actually spooked a bunch of the investors as well. After the announcement was made, we saw a lot of these corporations that are trying to make money out of wrecking country and wrecking the planet saw their stocks dive because it's become apparent to them that this is going to make it harder for these new projects to open. And of course, our friends over in the conservative media have lost their minds as well. And we've got, they're making the point that there's a massive blow to coal and gas, and that gas is the loser in the changes we've secured to the carbon plan. And I don't quite know how to take this, but when someone writing in The Australian even said that I wasn't exaggerating when saying coal and gas have taken a huge hit. And he says that it's going to leave the economy reeling. Well, what I think leaves the economy reeling is droughts and fires and floods, and the fact that our farmers are earning $30,000 less than they would have than because of climate change per year already. So we have landed a big blow on coal and gas, but there's much more to do, right? There's much more to do because we know that even though we've locked off about half of those projects, Labor still wants to open the rest, right? Labor is still saying that they want to open more coal and gas, even after the UN Secretary General has just really, really clearly said the only way that we're going to meet our climate targets and have any chance of a safer climate is if we stop opening these massive, massive coal and gas projects. So we've now got a fight on our hands, right? We've managed to deliver a huge blow to coal and gas, stop about half of them going ahead, but we've now got a fight on our hands. And what we're going to do is fight them in the Parliament and push to keep changing the laws to stop Labor opening any of the new coal and gas projects, because that is what the science requires. We're going to fight them in our communities, in the places where we as MPs are, but we're also going to be fighting side by side with the campaigners on the ground who have been working so long and so tirelessly to stop these corporate giants from wrecking their country and from wrecking the climate. And please pop any questions that come out of this presentation I've just given you into the chat. But right now, we're going to have a chat, have a conversation with someone who has been working on the front line about one of those big projects that I was telling you about, the Beetaloo project, that has the equivalent of about 68 years worth of pollution locked up in all those Northern Territory gas basins. And this is Kat, who is from Frack Free NT, who's been campaigning on the Beetaloo. She's a long-time campaigner in Northern Australia. She's currently working as a community organiser on Larrakia country in Darwin for Frack Free NT. Great to have you here, Kat. Thanks for giving us your time. There's a lot of people who are really excited to hear from you and to learn what we can do about the campaign. But first, can I just ask, how are people feeling today, and how's the campaign against the Beetaloo going?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Adam. Look, I think people here are, well, I am feeling quietly optimistic, and probably it's the first little glimmer, a sense of hope that we've had in a while. You know, we've still got, you know, Tambrand Resources and things as we speak importing their drill rigs and things. But these sort of achievements, I think, are really important to show people that the fight is not over. We do hear from the general public sometimes quite despondent, saying sort of, what's the point? It's a done deal. It's not a done deal. And this shows us it's not a done deal and that it's worth continuing this fight.
And tell me about what people are feeling, that you're working with, people are feeling about the Beetaloo project and why it's so important for them for it to be stopped.
Yeah, the Beetaloo, fracking in the Beetaloo, the prospect of fracking in the Beetaloo, it's like this big dark cloud that is hanging over us all the time. It's honestly terrifying. And the thing with fracking the Beetaloo is it's not just a climate issue for us, it's a lands rights issue, it's a water issue, it's a pollution issue. The fight, you know, people up here that have been fighting for over a decade to protect the NT from fracking in the Beetaloo, it has brought together the most unlikely of allies. And I think that's a real testament to the strength here and the feeling in the community that we don't want it. Pastoralists are concerned, traditional owners are concerned, rural residents are concerned. Yeah, it's a big worry here. And
so you've got a Labor government in the Northern Territory, and we've got a federal Labor government. I mean, how have people found dealing with those governments when it comes to the Beetaloo, or is it, from their perspective, has it been full steam ahead?
Yeah, I think there is a sentiment here among local people here that we feel like we're not being listened to by our local government. You know, I mean, this fight has been going on now for almost a decade, and there have been endless amounts of surveys, door knocking campaigns, things, and the results from all of these are the majority of the population here don't want it. They don't want fracking, regardless of their political stripe. And feeling like when we present these to our local members, just not being listened to, and that they're being swayed, it seems, a lot stronger from the gas lobby and industry than they are by the people living here.
Yeah, it's pretty powerful, the coal and gas corporations and the teeth that the claws that they have in it. As we were negotiating with Labor at times, it felt like we were negotiating with the political wing of the coal and gas corporations, like they just really have their hooks in. Here's my very unsophisticated way of perhaps giving you a bit of a boost, Kat, and everyone else, in screen sharing via my mobile phone. a new article that's just gone up where it says the Greens and the gas lobby both claim that climate policy will prevent new gas projects. So even the gas lobby are now out complaining that the changes that we've secured are going to make it harder to open new gas projects, and the Beetaloo's are going to be up there amongst them. Kat, is there anything else that you want to tell people about the campaign, about the push, or about how you're feeling at the moment that you'd like everyone online to know?
Yeah, just know that we've got so many dedicated, incredibly dedicated, amazing, passionate people here fighting, but no fight here in the NT, I think, can be won in the NT alone. We need people in Sydney and people in Melbourne and people in Canberra. We need them to know where the Beetaloo is, what's happening there, how that's going to affect them. We need all the support we can get, basically.
Yeah, look, thanks very much, Kat. But you've got our support, and I hope that, you know, from this, you've just been given a big boost in Parliament, and you've got the support of people right around the country. And you're right, like this is, we can't just leave it to people up in the Northern Territory to fight this fight alone. And this is something that from now until right up till the next election, we've got to make it very, very clear that the government now has the power to stop these projects, and they've got to stop these projects because that's what is being demanded of us. And we've got to stop the Beetaloo. So thanks very much, Kat. All power to you. And I hope you feel a bit better today, and you've got a bit more of a spring in your step, knowing you've got so many people around the country on your side. Thanks, Kat.
Thanks, Adam.
And now I want to introduce to you Antonia, who's from the Tiwi Islands, where they are engaged in a big fight against Santos, a big gas giant, over the Barossa project. And they've had a couple of pretty big wins along the way. Antonia is a Tiwi resident and an environmental advocate who's been actively involved in a successful legal fight to stop the Santos Barossa project. Hi, Antonia. Thanks so much for joining us. Tell us about how you're feeling today, and tell us a bit more about Barossa and the fight against Santos that you've been engaged in.
Hi, Adam. Thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this. First of all, I want to say thank you so much to your team, in particular to Senator Dorinda Cox, who has been on this journey with us for the past 2 years, supporting us in everything that we do, supporting us when we came down to Canberra to lobby in Parliament. And yeah, well done. And we are so excited. The reaction was like we just run the grand final of the AFL. There was lots of cheering, and then lots of tears, and then of course the question of what next. You know, what do we do now? What does this mean for us? So everyone just went straight back into strategy mode. But the feeling is that this is another win, and thank goodness, because we've been doing this now for the Tiwi people. No one knew about it until May 2021 when I first found out about it, and went home and asked everybody on the island, you know, what if they knew about Barossa project, and they all said no. So that then resulted in us lodging a case with the federal court, where we took NOPSEMA, the federal offshore regulator, to court with Santos, about not being considered relevant people to even be consulted about the project, even though the pipeline they want to put in is only 6 kilometres off the coastline, and it goes right, and they want to put it right across the entire west coast of the Tiwi Islands. Now, Tiwi Islands is the second largest island in this country to Tasmania. So if you imagine a pipeline going all along the east coast of Tasmania, that's the equivalent of what they wanted to do here. So thankfully we won our case in the federal court, which Santos then were required to come and consult with Tiwi people. And then even when we won, they still appealed it. So we had to go back to court again, because they still wanted to continue on without talking to Tiwi people. And then we won again. And then fortunately, so they had to stop drilling. They'd already started drilling at them. They had their drill rig in place, and you know, it had gone about 2 kilometres down, and when we won, they had to pull the drill rig out and tow it back in, and it's been moored just off the coast of Tiwi Islands for the last 6 months.
That must have been a good feeling watching that one come back in.
Oh my goodness. And when we fly from Darwin to home, it's only a 25-minute flight. You get to see it on the way over. So we always check to make sure it's still sitting there, and it is today. And then in January, they announced that they were going to start laying the pipeline because they couldn't drill. They thought, well, we'll do this on the side. And then we stopped them again, thank goodness, and demanded an underwater cultural heritage survey. So for us to, and then we were already planning our next steps. And then to wake up yesterday and get the news was a massive sign of relief, because our Labor MPs have not been supporting us at all. If anything, we've had a Labor MP talk about going over to the Tiwi Islands to talk to everybody about it. You know, they're not a part of the campaign. We know they're not coming to tell people that it, you know, it's not okay. And it just gives us hope knowing that the Greens are still pushing on and that you're supporting and advocating for these projects, because NT has just been made a sacrifice zone for fossil fuel, for cotton, for agriculture, for water mining. It's massive. And I think up until this point, even until tonight, a lot of people are not aware of what's happening up here in the NT. It's like we're out of sight, out of mind. So thank you very much for this. And our greatest wish is that the investors do see it as something that's not viable for them, and that it goes against every human rights, you know, every aspect of human rights that people have in this country. And even our Timorese and Indonesian neighbours, they're just as close, and they're actually even closer and going to be more affected if there's an oil spill, just like the one they had in WA when they killed all the dolphins. And I don't even know if they're aware of what's happening, and it makes me feel really sad for them. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm just totally in awe of the fight that you've been engaged in, the fact that you've had so many wins so far, and we can see how hard you're fighting. And look, really, when we have last week, we have the UN Secretary General singling out countries like Australia and just saying, look, you can't open any more coal and gas projects. And we know that. And one of the things that's often not known is that, you know, gas is as dirty as coal from a climate perspective. And so when saying you can't open any more coal and gas projects if we're to have any chance of meeting our climate crisis, it feels like the Australian government is just sort of sitting there with its hands on its ears and not wanting to do, wanting to act and listen to that advice at all. But hearing you fight and have the wins is really inspirational to all of us. But as I think I've seen someone drop in the chat, it shouldn't be left up to the communities on the ground. This is something the government should be acting on, right? And that is what we're pushing the government to do in Canberra, is to say, listen to the science and stop opening all of these up. And like, if we had our way, they'd stop opening, they wouldn't even open one single project. We've stopped about half of them in our 9 months in being in balance of power, and now we've got to come after the rest, because the rest includes Barossa. And so I just want you to know, Antonia, that I reckon you've got support of everyone who's on this call, on this big town hall that we're having. You've got support of a lot of people in Canberra, and part of what we'll do is we'll make sure that it's not just left up to you, and we won't rest until we fought to stop this government opening and proceeding ahead with the Barossa. Because really now, I mean, what this legislation passing through Parliament shows, with a willing Senate, is that there's actually the will in the Parliament to stop this. And it's not only us who are online who are behind you, but when they surveyed, 57% of the whole Australian population do not want any new coal, oil or gas projects opened, right? It's a majority view. It's just that big corporations like Santos have got their hooks into the governments all around the country, and so the government's acting in the corporate vested interests rather than in the public interest. But just know, Antonia, you've got all of us and you've got the public behind you. So thanks very much for everything you're doing.
Thank you so much, Adam, and to all of the Greens for supporting us.
Thanks. Now, thanks to everyone online too for all the questions that you've put into the chat, and we're going to try and get on to some of them now. Catherine has asked, does the cap apply to the emissions from exported gas and coal, or just the actual emissions of the fossil fuel companies? And this is a really important question, because Australia is actually the third largest exporter of fossil fuel pollution in the world, behind Russia and Saudi Arabia. Not exactly great company to be in. That's not an Olympic podium that you want to be on. But Australia is the third largest exporter of fossil fuel pollution. And the pollution that we dig up here, which is called Scope 1 emissions, to get technical for a moment, so that's the pollution here in Australia that comes out of these coal and gas mines, is of course magnified around the rest of the world because that gets all exported, sent offshore and burned. The government, with the exception of the Beetaloo, which I'll come back to in a moment, the government's refused to count any of the pollution from when the coal or gas is actually burnt. They only count the pollution from the coal and gas here. But why it's so significant, so to answer your question, it's just the actual emissions. But why that is so significant is that in Australia, if we can stop those emissions here, what are called Scope 1 emissions, if we can stop them, then we prevent a much, much larger amount of Scope 3 emissions or exported pollution around the world, right? Because most of this, the company's pollution here, bearing in mind that this safeguard scheme predominantly covers coal and gas and oil corporations, if we can stop them lifting their pollution here, it means we've stopped them lifting it around the world as well. And it's a massive gift that we'd be giving to the planet to keep it in the ground. Alex has asked, are new polluters or projects treated differently or the same as existing ongoing projects? There'll be tougher restrictions on new projects, Alex. That's part of what we've been able to secure. Some of those new projects, like Barossa, will have to now pay extra compared to other existing projects because there's actually a lot of CO2 in the ground, under the ocean, in the fields that they're trying to dig up. They're now going to have to pay extra for that, a lot more. Beetaloo is going to have to pay a lot more. And also all of these new projects that are coming in, so they'll have to meet higher standards, higher restrictions, and therefore bear higher costs. But also the new projects are going to face that pollution trigger that we talked about before. So before those new projects can come in, the government has to look and say, are they going to lift Australia's pollution? And if they're going to lift Australia's pollution, the government's got to take steps to stop Australia's pollution going up. And that could include stopping these new projects from coming into the scheme at all. So the new projects will face some tougher barriers. How does the safeguard mechanism impact a polluter like Qantas? Well, there's I mentioned that the 57, so of the companies covered by the safeguard mechanism, 57% of them are coal, oil and gas corporations. The other 43% is industry. It includes steelworks, glassworks, and some transport companies, as you've mentioned. So the other 43%, those big polluters, are also covered by it. They're in a slightly different position, many of them. So take the example of aluminium. Aluminium is a big polluter at the moment, but that's largely because the electricity that they get comes from polluting sources. And so if you could do things that stopped them polluting, i.e. switch over to renewable energy, then they're going to have a future in a clean economy. But coal and gas don't. And that's why we've put so much emphasis on, in particular, putting a burden on coal and gas corporations. Who measures the emissions? Is it self-reported? Well, it's a bit of both. Part of it's a Tony Abbott scheme, and it's not really the best way to go about cutting pollution. If you wanted to cut pollution, you wouldn't use this scheme. And they set each of these polluters what are called baselines that they're not allowed to go above. And if they do, they have to buy these permits, as we've mentioned. Largely, it's going to be overseen by the government, and the government's going to have to set those baselines for each of the polluters. And then the emissions themselves, again, it's largely overseen by the government. There's been a lot of problems, there's been quite a few problems with the measuring of some emissions, and we don't think, for example, that methane is being measured properly, and methane is a pretty toxic climate gas because it has such an immediate and short-term effect. And if we could do one thing to stop the climate crisis, given we've got a short window left to do it, it would be to keep methane in the ground. And so there's going to be a review of how that is measured to ensure that it gets measured properly, because we think it's being underestimated. So short answer is that it's a bit of a combination of both. It's not just total self-reporting. The companies will be required to produce some reports, but there will be government oversight of it. All right. Which government department or authority will enforce and monitor the hard caps? And that's from Monica. So good question. There's going to be a couple. It's going to be primarily overseen by the Climate Change Department. So not the Resources Department, but the Climate Change Department, and the Climate Change Authority, which is an independent body, has a bit of a role here as well. The Climate Change Authority has to look at all these big new projects and scan them on the horizon. And then if it looks like any of these new projects coming into the system is going to push pollution above where it is and force it to start rising again, then they report it to the minister. Similarly, any new body that comes through the environment laws that has high levels of pollution, that has to be fed up into the minister as well. And from other sources as well within the government, as they're assessing projects, they can, the secretary of the Climate Change Department can get the information from them and say, oh, well, look, actually, Minister, I think it's going to go up. And so it'll ultimately be the Minister for Climate Change and Energy who is responsible for this. And that means too that under the way that the amendments have been drafted is that if it looks like the pollution is going to go above the cap and start going back up again, like real pollution, forget about the offsets, if it looks like real pollution is going to start going up again, then it's the minister who has to put new obligations on either the corporations that are trying to come in or the ones that are in there at the moment to bring it back down. And if they don't take that step of changing the obligations to bring it back down, you can take them to court. They'd be breaking the law. So it'll be the Minister for Climate Change and Energy who's ultimately responsible. Do these changes enable organisations to take the minister to court for allowing projects that blow the caps on emissions, Emma? Yes, broadly speaking, yes. So what the minister has to do is, if it looks like, as they see these projects that are coming down the line, and they don't take action, they don't put new additional obligations on or stop the entrant coming into the scheme or say, you know, you have to go down to half size or whatever it is. If they don't do that, they would be breaking the law and you could take them to court, right? So they will have an obligation to keep the scheme working in a way that keeps pollution below that cap. And if they don't do that, you can take them to court. So that's that's what will be in the law. Is a pollution trigger the same as the climate trigger in the EPBC, which is the environment legislation? No, not quite, Simon. And what that means is this. There's one of the things the Greens have been pushing for a really long time is to make sure that the environment legislation in this country, which has to give an environmental tick-off to big new projects before they go ahead, that the environment legislation has to take into account, the minister has to take into account the impact on climate before it goes ahead, right? And that would be not just the domestic emissions, the domestic pollution, but the global pollution as well. What would be the total impact? What would it mean for climate change if this project went ahead? And would that then damage Australia's environment? At the moment, under the laws, our environment laws, the minister doesn't even have to take climate change into account, which is just astounding, given that climate change, according to the Environment Department itself, is the biggest threat to Australia's environment and biodiversity. We know that. It's coal and gas fueling the climate crisis that are the biggest threat to Australia's environment, but the minister isn't even obliged to take climate change into account. Under a climate trigger that Simon has asked about, they'd have to. If they didn't, you could take them to court. What's happening in a safeguard is slightly different. In that the minister will just have to look at the overall level of pollution, make sure the overall level of pollution is coming down, and if it's not, take steps, including potentially against the new project. It won't necessarily take into account the broader range that of matters that a climate trigger might. That's why one of the things that we're going to keep pushing for from here on in as a way of stopping the other half of those coal and gas projects from going ahead is to put a climate trigger into our laws so that climate has to be taken into account, not just in the climate change department, but in the environment department as well. So that when the environment department gives the environmental tick off to approvals, they have to take to big projects, they have to take climate change into account. And what about future governments changing the legislation? Do we need to worry? Well, this is why we've got to make sure we have lots of Greens in Parliament to ensure that that doesn't happen. We'll put this in the legislation, and it'll only be a future government that could change the legislation, but they'd have to get that through the Senate. Now, look, who knows what happens with a future government, because there's always governments backflip and change their mind, and future governments might try and tear this down, just like we saw the coalition try to tear down the carbon price. It's why it's so critical to have Greens in the balance of power to stop them. But it's also crystal clear to me after the last few months of negotiations that actually Labor doesn't get the climate crisis that's fueled by coal and gas. I would have thought that after the UN Secretary General and the World Scientists report that's saying, please don't open any more coal and gas mines, that the debate with the government would have been, yeah, okay, we're not going to open any more. How do we make sure, and how do we phase out the existing ones? But they're just not listening to the science, which makes me always worried that Labor or Liberal in the future will try and find ways of changing the law back again. And that's why we need to build these campaigns, right? These campaigns to stop the Barossa, these campaigns to stop what is happening in the Beetaloo, but right around the country, because we've got to put pressure on the government, right? If we can get that people's climate movement that is going so strong, led by the likes of Greta Thunberg, but here students as well, the students striking for climate, plus also the big climate movements and rallies that we saw before. If we can get that up and going again, we can get them to stop the other half, and no government will ever try and change the law in the future. In fact, we'll make the law even stronger. So, yeah, look, governments in the future can change the law, but not if there's enough people on the streets and not if there's enough Greens in Parliament to stop them. Now, Greta Thunberg said in an interview with Russell Howard, says that hope is a conscious daily exercise rather than an externally sourced emotion. What do the Greens MPs do to keep up hope while fighting for the Australian people and the planet? Look, today, this week gives me a bit of a spring in my step, and it should too for you as well, if you've been part of the climate movement or you've been despairing about the future for you or for your kids or for your grandkids. Because what we've shown is we can actually take on the gas corporations and the coal corporations and win, right? We now know that we can stop pollution from going up in this country from these coal and gas corporations. And we got in space of less than a year in balance of power, managed to stop about half of the projects from going ahead, and now we're coming after the rest of them. And so I think after this, the fight is not over. If we thought that, it turns out kicking out Scott Morrison wasn't the end of the fight, it was just the start of the fight, because this government is just as wedded to coal and gas as the last one was. They talk about coal and gas going on forever and ever and ever. But we've just shown that we can stop them. We've just shown that we can stop them. And if we all now work together and fight, we can stop the rest of them from being opened up as well. So that's what gives me inspiration, is knowing that 57% of people across the country are with us and don't want new coal, oil or gas mines opened. And we've just struck a big blow against coal and gas, and that gives me a lot of hope. And when the gas corporations are out there saying, oh, hang on, this is going to stop us opening up new gas projects, that gives me hope as well. And now I want to introduce you to someone else who gives me a lot of hope. And as I've been working side by side with her now in this parliament to fight on behalf of all of these communities and to take on these coal and gas giants, they're not only wrecking our planet, they're putting up power bills for everyone and they're making obscene profits. and a strong campaigner for people, for First Nations, and for country is our resources and our First Nations spokesperson, Senator Dorinda Cox. Hi, Dorinda. Thanks so much for joining us, and over to you.
Thanks, Adam, and thanks for your leadership and the work that you guys have put into this amazing negotiations. And welcome, everyone. I too am on the lands of the Ngunnawal Ngambri people here in Canberra tonight, and just stepped out of the chamber to make sure that I was able to chat to you all about the amazing process that we've been through. Look, I also had mixed emotions about how much work we have to do, particularly in the climate action that is required. And, you know, we saw the IPCC report last week saying, you know, it's not a casual walk, it's actually a sprint to climate action that we need. And since I've been in the Senate for the last 18 months, I've been working alongside some amazing campaigners, and I want to shout out to Antonia up there at Barossa, you know, Cara and Auntie Polly at Narrabri, who I visited only a couple of weeks ago, the crew at Beetaloo in particular, Ricky Dank and the other TOs there on country. All of these things have amalgamated to amazing grassroots campaigns that are being run by mob in particular, with the help of our environmental movement, and working together to make sure that we get action to stop the fossil fuel industry. And can I tell you, when Adam gave us some insights this week about the negotiations with Labor, Adam can attest to this, that I broke down into tears and said, this will actually make a difference. It'll make a difference to my people who haven't given their free, prior and informed consent for their country to be fracked, for their waters to be destroyed and have potential gas leak and oil leaks in their country, and that this will make a difference tomorrow for people who are fighting for land and sea country. And so I you know, think that this is an amazing opportunity for us to put a spanner in the works, and the job's definitely not finished, as Adam has already said, but I've been at the forefront of helping alongside some of those amazing campaigns. We need to stop the other 50% or so of those coal and gas projects from being opened up in the pipeline. And can I just say, as you know, I've just stepped out of the chamber, and we are copying it left, right and centre about the work that we've been doing and the amazing leadership of Adam and his team, but also right across our Greens MPs and the work that we are doing to activate all of those spaces to support all of these campaigns to make sure we stop the fossil fuel industry. And we've got to mobilise all of the resources that we have and continue to work on legislative change. And that's what we're doing right here in the Parliament. I know that Labor absolutely won't change their ways. You know, they are beholden to their donors. They are beholden to the state capture that has been operating in this country for quite some time. And my former WA Senator Scott Ludlam has done a lot of work in this area, and you know, previous senators as well talked about the state capture of capturing our democracy and what that looks like. And finally, we have a reaction that Adam articulated before and showed us on his mobile phone about the reaction from the coal and gas companies. And it's been a great 48 hours or so to hear and see them react in this way, because we know we're making a difference. And I love that we are doing that work, and we're doing that work not just here in the chamber, but also with all of you. So we walk beside you and know that we will continue to amplify all of those fights across the country. Now, one of the really special fights that comes right out of my home state of Western Australia is that of the Scarborough Gas Project in Murrujuga. And I want to introduce you to my good friend and the campaigner that is in charge of working on the ground, and is a grassroots campaigner, Raelene Cooper. And I just want to show you a short video first of the work that Raelene's been doing in Murrujuga and the amazing country that we're trying to save there, and then we'll have a chat to Raelene.
Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Bangari bangari na unduala, babu nuangai unduala, wai kanangari ma unduala, unduala wangendari.
This water is very important to us, you know, and even out there in the islands, such a beautiful place. We can't let it be destroyed. No, we can't. You know, I've been a fellow ranger here, looking after the country for a few years. Me and some others, you know. So I felt how we get together and I hear how we all really advocate for this country, you know, this water. We have to stand up.
Mum Toots, would you agree to say that due to some of the industry and emissions and impacts of those emissions today, it's in direct threat now to some of our very Ngara culture and histories in that effect, yeah?
Yeah, it is.
And that's partly why we all in some way gathered here today, to raise that awareness and talk more openly about that, yeah.
We need to talk openly. I think it's about time the government needs to get Aboriginal people to come sit with them about these matters, because they're not going to get nowhere. But we need to I think if they're not going to come and talk to us, then let's have a tug of war with the government.
When Nan talks about global warming, we're seeing it in our countries, over in eastern states in particular. It's the 4th time now that they're going through flooding, and it's affecting everybody all over the world. And you know, a lot of the stuff that we've seen in the past from our old people, and that's why we're here. You know, they never had the chance to speak and to talk for this water, and it's just not fair. And the procedural fairness has never been that way for First Nations people. And it's time the governments and industry start listening, because this is about all of us.
'Cause the red dirt here is all the same. The path we follow should have no shame. So when I walk with my head high, and with my spirit, I'm not afraid to try. Said I'm not afraid to try. I'm not afraid to try. I'm not afraid to try.
Save the rock art! Save the rock art! Save the rock art! Save the rock art!
Thank you, and I'm going to quickly do a quick intro for Raelene. Raelene Cooper is one of the traditional owners from the Murujuga area, which is known as the Burke Peninsula in Western Australia. Raelene is an integral part of the Save Our Songlines campaign and has dedicated her life to saving the Murujuga petroglyphs and the rock art in this area. Raelene has been fighting this fight for quite some time now, and Murujuga contains some really important country. It is the site of the Seven Sisters Dreaming Songline. It contains law grounds and dreaming stories. And Raelene was a previous chair of the Murujuga Aboriginal Corporation, and she left that position, the sacrifices that we as First Nations people make, and a conscious decision between fighting for country and what is right and holding positions in our community, because sometimes they don't match up, particularly when free, prior and informed consent is not obtained. Now, this has caused significant impact from the Burrup, the work of Pluto gas project there, but also Perdaman and the urea fertiliser plant that they're wanting to put there and move some of the rock art and the petroglyphs in that area. And Raelene actually travelled alongside one of our other sisters, Josie Alec, to Geneva, Switzerland, to the UN Permanent Forum to talk about the impact of what's happening up there on Murujuga country, the destruction and the desecration at the hands of industry. And Raelene joins us tonight to talk specifically about that. So I'm going to hand over to you, Raelene. We've just got you on mute, Raelene, so we're just figuring out how we can get you off.
All good? Yeah, hi, everybody. Sorry about that. I'll start again. Dorinda, thank you so very much. Sisters, and to our other sisters, Antonia, you know, thank you so very much for your wanga, waiba to you. And to Adam and the Greens team, thank you so very much. And yes, I was watching yesterday morning, you know, the events that were happening on the screen. So I was really quite pleased. I gave Dorinda a text like, yeah, thumbs up, well done. So yeah, look, I was very fortunate that, you know, Save Our Songlines had Dorinda and Adam come up to check this out. And it's been a really great, you know, support for us at this ground level, because it can get really difficult and very challenging. Look, to start with, I guess, you know, as Dorinda had said, and look, everything that Antonia had said, I'll steal them words from you, sister, because basically that's exactly what happened here in our ngora, within the corporation, and how, you know, this particular corporation was bounded by an agreement that was state government agreement. There were no native title, was distinguished, and basically, you know, government had said, right, you know, we're going to give you this and you kind of deal with it. So over a certain amount of years, you know, the corporation, Murujuga, has, you know, gotten on its feet. However, it's quite difficult to resume outside of what these agreements state. And when an agreement is stating that myself, family members and other traditional custodians for this ngora aren't able to speak about, you know, the concerns we have with the industry, the impacts, you know, of our ecosystems, the environment, our landscapes, the ngora, the water, you know, the boa runs right through. And in saying that, I was quite disturbed. The facts, as Antonia had said, they didn't know nothing about what was going on. I was working in an organisation as a director, and a former chair was not aware of what was actually happening and taking place. So you're right, I stood out of that scene, because in my culture and in our culture, First Nations, we have an obligation and responsibility, you know, to speak for the ngora. And when the ngora is telling you, the land, the country is telling you, our Mother Earth, with all these devastating, chaotic chaos that she's delivering, they are warning signs, and we know this, we feel it. And I think, you know, the thought of an industry like Perdaman, which is a chemical plant, coming in and putting up on the screen in the room that we held the directors, and basically stating on the screen, you know, we respect you and your culture, and then sit across the table telling me and traditional custodians, we want to remove your rock art, you know, 50,000 plus year old rock art, history, culture. No, that is disrespectful. It's not happening. And that was that. So at the end of the day, you know, it was, I guess, you know, in fruition with everything that's been happening, we didn't realise how big this campaign would get. Thrilled, and the challenges that we've hit, and the achievements that we've achieved. Right now, last week was the third submission of the Section 10 that was applied after our Minister, Tanya Pilbersek, had declined our submission for Section 9. And then, of course, we came back. I was away at the time. I came back and we put in for the Section 10 because, you know, there was no immediate imminent threat with the Section 9. However, right now, the Section 10 is in progress in terms of the protections we want for the ngora and for those rock art and, you know, for the environment. So the third lot have gone in. Our reporter that our minister very welcomely had appointed, Miss Alison Stone, to do the inquiry and report into our Section 10. And, you know, it's very thorough. You know, we are as well, Antonia, and for others, very skeptical in terms of, and optimistic in terms of what's going on in government. We're not very big fans, and to say the least, with a lot of, you know, the pressures and, you know, the legislative acts, you know, are within this just one place right here. It doesn't make any sense, and I'm not the smartest tool in the toolbox, but let me tell you, I did know that there needed to be changes within these legislations. And in saying that, the Heritage Act, don't get me started. But look, it's been overwhelming in terms of, you know, the alliances that we have connected with. Ngurura people from the other side of Australia. We've only just come back from Sydney. Dorinda was there, of course, in terms of what was going on in that way in Parliament in Canberra at the time. Look, it's been a big year for everybody, and, you know, my hearts go out and to all of those who've been fighting the fight. This fight's it's not going to end. It is a continuing fight. Look, you know, the changes that are made now are changes, you know, it could take another 100 years before changes are made. Are we going to live that long? The way things are going, it's too critical. Our Ngora is a very big, special place where we all hold significance. Murujuga, or the Burrup, has been, if no one knows at this stage, has been nominated for World Heritage UNESCO nomination. Look, it's been a huge thing. I was a part of this when they started. I congratulate Murujuga for pushing this to go ahead. But in saying that, you know, for our Premier, Mark McGowan, to get up and make statements in the media stating, you know, industry and culture can work hand in hand. Well, I totally object to that. It cannot. We've seen it. We've lived it. It's in my backyard. You know, and I guess, you know, the rest of our Ngurura mob and those who are on the panel tonight, you know, you see it and we're feeling it in the Wirrag. Our hearts are hurting. Our mother is hurting, and we hold a big, big songline here that reach from this Ngurura right across this nation. And it's bringing those alliances together and bringing those songlines together. It's a big, huge thing for us. And it's what's supposed to happen. It's about starting to heal this Ngurura, the Mother Earth. And as fierce as she can be, as beautiful she is on the other side. And, you know, for those areas that hold a big, big songline here, come through right from Ngurura to other side, is the water law, you know, and it saddens me and disheartens me that a lot of industry and significant sites are being destroyed all over this nation, and they are affecting our cultural habitats, you know, the environment, our ecosystems, our animals, our bush medicines, you know, our history and our culture and our environment are one. It's everything. And it's important that, you know, we give understanding and awareness to others that don't see this, view this, and, you know, the critical necessities in looking after the Ngurura and those significant sacred places that hold those special water laws that rip through this entire continent and beyond is something really important. Because you know what, we all wake up in the morning, we all put our feet, you know, our dinner on the ground, and we all connect to Mother Earth. And at the end of the day, no one, you would not hurt your mother or have anyone hurt your mother. So we as people, and for those earth warriors that I call everybody that's on the screen and who does the same work we do, we have obligations and responsibility for her and for humanity. And this is what we do. And it's been a challenging to say the least, but I love a challenge, dig the heels back in. And look, I'll put it out there now. We're hoping we've found some information that's happened over the last day or so. And, you know, for those country mob, Ngurura mob on screen, and we invite you all to come back. We'll possibly be doing another rally and march here on the Ngurra out of Marajuga. And yeah, we'd love for you to come in support of this. And invite you to come and, yeah, we'd love to take you all on a private tour and come out and see what's pretty special and amazing. And I'm sure all the mob up north and all around, you know, big love to you guys all. It's a fight that it's not just our fight, the next generation is coming. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Raelene. And I'm sorry that you're having to do this fight, but it's inspirational to hear the fight. And it was nice to see you again. I was lucky enough to spend a bit of time with you up on your country, and it is such a significant and special place, and one that we've got to fight to protect. And the fight for you is the same fight that we're fighting to stop this climate crisis. And I hope that you know from this that you've got a whole pile of people around the country with you. And as I said before, you know, when they take it out of the realms of what the coal and gas corporations say, and they ask the people, 57% of people say we've got to stop projects like Scarborough going ahead, we've got to stop new coal, oil and gas projects from opening up. So you've actually got the people on your side already, and part of what we've got to do is now turn that into a reality. So someone's just dropped into the chat to say, I wish, Raelene, you could see us all cheering here and supporting you on. So just know, Raelene, you got a lot of love and a lot of support, and it's really nice to see you again. I hope to see you again up there soon. Thanks for joining us.
Big love to everybody. Yep.
Thanks. And look, thanks everyone for being part of this evening here with us. And we've scored a big blow against coal and gas, but look, we've got a big fight. We went into this as the Greens saying we wanted the government to listen to the science and just stop opening up new coal and gas projects. Like, we actually need to do a lot more. We need to be quickly phasing out the existing coal and gas projects that we've got in the pipeline in a way that looks after workers and communities as we make the transition. But when it said just stop opening up the existing ones, stop pouring petrol on the fire, because you can't put the fire out while you're pouring petrol on it. So we've managed to stop about half of them from going ahead, but we've got to do the rest. And we are up against a government that wants to keep opening coal and gas projects. So this is actually just the beginning. There is a lot more left to do, including in this parliament. The Greens are going to keep pushing to strengthen the environment laws that are going to come to the parliament next year. And this is what was referring to when someone asked about what is a climate trigger. We have to make sure our environment laws and our environment minister can take climate change into account and can stop projects going ahead that will increase climate change. The Greens are going to fight fossil fuel subsidies in the budget, because it's still the case that despite the fact that we know how much damage is being caused by coal, gas and oil, the government still subsidises it. For example, if you put petrol in your car, you'll be paying over 40 cents a litre tax, when those big miners like Gina Reinhardt and Clive Palmer go and put diesel in their trucks. They pay the tax, and then at the end of the year, you, the taxpayer, gives them a subsidy to pay it all back and gives them a refund on their tax. Like, you're basically paying, if you're paying taxes, you're basically paying to subsidise Gina Reinhardt and Clive Palmer to buy cheap diesel. I think they can pay the same for petrol as everyone else. And I think we should stop using public money to subsidise coal and gas and oil. And that's what we'll be fighting for in the budget, to stop those fossil fuel subsidies from going ahead. We've already as part of the changes we've secured, stopped the government giving money to some new coal and gas projects. And now we've got to stop these subsidies to these corporations that are ripping us off, putting people through a cost of living hell, and also wrecking our planet. What we've also got to do is back communities around the country that are fighting new coal and gas. We now need to build up that people's movement for climate action again that we've seen on the streets before. We now need to build it up in numbers to the point where the government will listen to the science and stop opening these massive coal and gas projects, which we know that they want to open. So we'd really like you to get involved. We'd really like you to get involved. There's a number of things that you can do that will make a big difference. Can you all go and join our Save Our Songlines social media? The team are dropping the link in the chat. Give your support to Raelene because they're doing an amazing, amazing job up there in WA. Spend a bit of time with them up there. It's a long way away from a capital city. But as you heard from Kat from the Beetaloo, these campaigns will get won in the cities and around the rest of the country as well. So if you can show your support and go and join the Save Our Songlines social media, it would give a huge boost. Can you become a climate champion with us? We've got a few thousand climate champions who power our work with a small regular donation every month. And that has helped us change the debate in this country. We are now having a debate on the front pages of our media and on our screens about the causes of the climate crisis, coal and gas. And it's something that Labor doesn't want to talk about. We know the Liberals don't want to talk about it because they back it and they're unashamed about it. But it's something Labor, who's in power now, don't want to talk about it. But through our climate champions, we have changed the debate in this country when now the question of climate is a question of stopping coal and gas. And that's been the work of so many people, including our climate champions, to help us get there. And now, having stopped half of them, we need to go and stop the other half, right? And we would love your help for that. But especially, could you please look out for the activities and get involved in your local area, because we're going to start targeting these remaining mines in every state. Links are in the chat. But you heard it from the campaigners on the ground. If you're living in a city, I know not everyone on this will be, but if you're living in a city or in a regional city or a capital city, don't think that just because these fights are happening far away that you can't do anything about it. It's the exact opposite. It's the exact opposite. That's the history of successful movements around this country, from the Franklin Dam campaign to this one now. We need people everywhere around the country to come and join in and get involved, because that is how we're going to tackle the climate crisis. Together, we're going to make Labor accountable to the science. We have to stop them from opening up the other half of those coal and gas projects. Thank you very much for joining us here tonight. I hope you found it useful and I hope you found it a little bit inspiring. We know we've got a big fight. This is the fight of our lives. We've just landed a big blow, but we can't stop now. And I hope to see you, together with Dorinda and myself and all of the other campaigners, in the fight to make sure we have a safer climate. Thanks for joining us.